Hey, recording this audio book out. Our Prison's Obsolete, Chapter 4 by Angela Davis. Now we're getting to the end now, a few pages left. The criminalization of Black and Latina women includes persisting images of hypersexuality that serve to justify sexual assaults against them both in and outside of prison. Such images were vividly rendered in a Nightline television series filmed in November 1999 on location at California's Valley State Prison for Women. Many of the women interviewed by Ted Koppel complained that they received frequent and unnecessary pelvic examinations, including when they visited the doctor with such routine illnesses as colds. In an attempt to justify these examinations, the chief medical officer explained that women prisoners had rare opportunities for male contact and that they therefore welcomed these superfluous gynecological exams. Although this officer was eventually removed from his position as a result of these comments, his reassignment did little to alter the pervasive vulnerability of imprisoned women to sexual abuse. Studies on female prisons throughout the world indicate that sexual abuse is an abiding, though unacknowledged, form of punishment to which women who have the misfortune of being sent to prison are subjected. This is one aspect of life in prison that women can expect to encounter either directly or indirectly, regardless of the written policies that govern the institution. In June 1998, Radhika Kumar Kumaraswamy Kumaraswamy. In June 1998, Radhika Kumaraswamy, the United Nations Special Rapporteur for Violence Against Women, visited federal and state prisons as well as immigration and naturalization detention facilities in New York, Connecticut, New Jersey, Minnesota, Georgia, and California. She was refused she was refused permission to visit women's prisons in Michigan where serious allegations of sexual abuse were pending. In the aftermath of her visits, Kumaraswamy announced that sexual misconduct by prison staff is widespread in American women's prisons. This clandestine indis- this clandestine institutionalization of sexual abuse violates one of the guiding principles of the United Nations Standard Minimum Rules for the Treatment of Prisoners, a UN instrument first adopted in 1955 and used as a guideline by many governments to achieve what is known as good prison practice. However, the US government has done little to publicize these rules, and it is probably the case that most correctional personnel have never heard of these UN standards. According to the standard minimum rules, imprisonment and other measures which result in cutting off an offender from the outside world are are afflictive by the very fact of taking from the person the right of self-determination by depriving him of his liberty. Therefore, the prison system shall not, except as incidental to justifiable segregation or the maintenance of discipline, aggravate the suffering inherent in such a situation. I gotta get my fucking charger. Oh my god, what? No. Is it? Oh, no. Okay, it was charged. Charger was in there, it just wasn't fucking turned on. Had a hell of a time with this one. Sexual abuse is surreptitiously incorporated in da, da, da. Sexual abuse is surreptitiously incorporated into one of the most habitual aspects of women's imprisonment, the strip search. As activists and prisoners themselves have pointed out, the state itself is directly implicated in this routinization of sexual abuse, both in permitting such conditions that render women vulnerable to explicit sexual coercion carried out by guards and other prison staff, and by incorporating into routine policy such practices as the strip search and body cavity search. Australian lawyer activist Amanda George has pointed out that the acknowledgement that sexual assault does occur in institutions for people with intellectual disabilities, prisons, psychiatric hospitals, youth training centers, and police stations usually centers around the criminal acts of rape and sexual assault by individuals employed in those institutions. Those offenses, though they are rarely reported, are clearly understood as being crimes for which the individual and not the state is responsible. At the same time as the state deplores unlawful sexual assaults by its employees, it actually uses sexual assault as a means of control. In Victoria, prison and police officers are vested with the power and responsibility to do acts which, if done outside of work hours, would be crimes of sexual assault. If a person does not consent to being stripped naked by these officers, force can lawfully be used to do it. These legal strip searches are, in the author's view, sexual assaults within the definition of indecent assault in the Crimes Act 1958 Vic, as amended in Section 39. At a November 2001 conference on women in prison held by the Brisbane based organization Sisters Inside, Amanda George described an action performed by a national gathering of correctional personnel working in women's prisons. Several women seized control of the stage and, some playing guards, others playing the role of prisoners, dramatized a strip search. According to George, the gathering was so repulsed According to George, the gathering was so repulsed by this enactment of a practice that occurs routinely in women's prisons everywhere that many of the participants felt compelled to disassociate themselves from such practices, insisting that this was not what they did. Some of the guards, George said, simply cried upon watching representations of their own actions outside the prison context. What they must have realized is that without the uniform, without the power of the state, the strip search would be sexual assault. But why is an understanding of the pervasiveness of sexual abuse in women's prison an important element of a radical analysis of the prison system, and especially of those forward looking analyses that lead us in the direction of abolition? Because the call to abolish the prison as the dominant form of punishment could not ignore the extent to which the institution of the prison has stockpiled ideas and practices that are hopefully approaching obsolescence in the larger society, but that retain all their ghastly vitality behind prison walls. The destructive combination of racism and misogyny, however much it has been challenged by social movements, scholarship, and art over the last 3 decades, retains all its awful consequences within women's prisons. The relatively uncontested presence of sexual abuse in women's prisons is one of many such examples. The increasing evidence of a U.S. prison industrial complex with global resonances leads us to think about the extent to which the many corporations that have acquired an investment in the expansion of the prison system are, like the state, directly implicated in an institution that perpetuates violence against women. And that's it. Chapter 4. Are prisons obsolete? Thanks for watching.